Hi, everyone. I'm Thomas Howard. I'm one of the ICE technical marketing engineers in the security policy and access team here at Cisco. And we're going to do a continuation of a webinar that we did about 2 months ago back in May. It was also titled Securing Cisco Catalyst Wireless with ICE, but we were only able to get through a couple of the initial scenarios that we wanted to do. I had some initial problems with my lab and had to do some troubleshooting that I wasn't expecting. I think it was still a great learning experience for everyone that saw that, or if you want to go see how to do some on-the-fly troubleshooting, it's a good one if you want to do that for wireless with ICE. But today we're going to pick up where we left off, and we're going to continue doing some of these other configurations and scenarios for pre-shared keys. This is going to include regular pre-shared keys, like I think everybody here already knows and loves. We're going to do multi-PSK, which you may or may not have done, as well as identity PSK, which is something that you can use for each unique MAC address that comes on the network. And then, of course, we're going to do some IEEE 802.1x with passwords and certificates. So we're going to go through a lot of this because of this is only dedicated to the Catalyst side of things. ICE totally works with Cisco Meraki. We're going to do one of these in the future, probably later in like September or October timeframe. We'll do the equivalent side with Meraki. But know that ICE totally works with Meraki or just about any device that does radius or TACACS. So ICE is completely compatible with any network device doing radius or TACACS. So just be aware of that, and we'll get to the Meraki side of things soon enough. So where we left off is we previously configured a guest SSID on our Catalyst wireless controller, and then we had it completely open, and then we also added an ICE guest portal with a very simple acceptable user policy to it. The idea here now is that we are going to have an IoT WLAN, a wireless LAN, and we're going to be able to configure pre-shared keys like you already do. Probably everyone has at home on their network. And then we're going to actually have multiple pre-shared keys on that same SSID as well. And then we'll go ahead and do individual pre-shared keys. That's something that will be enabled with ICE. And basically all of those filtering capabilities are done with MAC addresses with individual pre-shared keys, and we'll show you how that works. And then, of course, 802.1x with passwords and certificates. We'll do that on a corporate SSID, and we'll go through that process as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick recap of how this works. So pre-shared keys, everyone should know this because this is probably how everybody's home network works. The idea is we have a single pre-shared secret or key that all the devices know in order to get on to the network. Everybody uses the same key, nothing special there. So we can just go ahead and show you how that works real quick. So what I have is I have ICE here, and I also have my wireless controller. What I have is a 2800 Catalyst AP, and if I go in and look at just a quick recap of what we did last time, we have some VLANs pre-configured, and they're mapped to SVIs. So we have employee, guest, and a management VLAN. This is the one that we send the radius request from to authenticate our employees and our guests. And in the case of the IoT devices, we're going to be reusing this employee VLAN to put them on there as trusted devices. And then when we have our WLANs configured, I've already gone and pre-configured these. Given all the problems last time, I wanted to make sure we had plenty of times to actually discuss how the multi-PSK and the individual identity PSKs work with ICE. And so I have pre-configured pretty much all of this stuff so that we won't have those problems. I'm still going to go through and do the live demos and show you how it works in and changed some things along the way, but I wanted to make sure that's all there for you. But I've configured this guest, the IoT and the corporate WLANs with their SSIDs. And then I basically just prefix these with a dot so that it appears higher up in the ordered list of SSIDs in my little neighborhood over here. So it's easy for you guys to see and for us to find. Then if I go into the guest network, we went through how to configure all of this last time, so I'm not going to go through this in great detail. But we had to configure the authentication list. Of course, you need to be able to configure the authentication and authorization AAA servers. There was nothing to do in the advanced tabs. And then when it comes to the policy tags, we have a default policy, and we've added our policies to these already, and I'll show you those after this. So in the case of IoT, what we did is we went ahead and enabled that. For security, we had the default authentication list. Whoops, back to layer 2. We're doing WPA, WPA2 for association. We're using the default authorization list that we already configured. It's a WPA2 policy, and we're doing pre-shared keys. And I have this. I need to go ahead and delete these guys. I left those in there. And so we want to make sure we're only using a single pre-shared key down here. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in right now. It's just going to be Cisco 123 like you saw on the slide. And I'll update that. And what we have for AAA when we do the authentications is basically we went into Radius. We configured our ISE server. What we did here is specified, obviously, the IP address. The Radius pre-shared keys are here. And I also did it for the Radius change of authorization. So we have the pre-shared keys mapped over there as well. And I created a little testing account for sending test Radius queries over to ISE. We're using the standard authentication and accounting ports in ISE as well. And we then map those to a server group called AAA Group ISE. I did it in all caps just because whenever I look at a command line configuration, any variables that I configure, I like to have it clearly notated and set off with all caps. That also minimizes or completely eliminates any possibility of there being any kind of uppercase, lowercase sensitivity issues in the config as well. So it's a good idea to keep it consistent when doing that. Then we had to configure a method list. And basically what we're doing is we're now taking that AAA group for ISE, and we're sending it for authentication, authorization, and accounting by configuring it here for .1x. So it's really simple. You just say that we want to do 802.1x based authentication, and it's .1x, even though I know we're not doing .1x. It's actually just pre-shared keys. You still specify .1x, and you specify the group type. And it helps you to use these little info icons over here if you're not familiar with the Catalyst controllers. It kind of gives you the clues right there to do it. And basically, you find that group on this side and you move it over to this side, and you do that for authentication. You do it for authorization with network. So all the same thing, you just move it over. And then again for accounting. And in this case, it's called identity accounting. And we move AAA Group ISE over for that. And then when it comes to the AAA Advanced, I want to show you something in here which can be interesting depending upon what you're trying to do. The first is interim updates. So there have been problems in the past with the Catalyst controllers sending ISE way too many interim updates. It kind of floods ISE with these updates. So my recommendation would be just to leave that off. Typically, wireless devices can be authenticated pretty frequently. They're not always on all the time, and so you don't need to be sending interims a lot. So it's not that big of a deal. The other thing that's interesting is whenever the controller sends ISE the radius request, you have some ability to customize how the called station ID attribute is formatted when it gets sent to ICE. And I'll show you that example once we do our first authentication. So what I did is I went in here and I kind of customized it a little bit. So like I said, the called station ID, this is basically the MAC address of the network device that the endpoint is connecting to, and that would be our access point, right? And so you have these different options for how you would like the access points MAC address and identity to be sent over to ICE as the called station ID. And so I'm going to use the AP name and SSID, and I'll show you why in one of our authorization rules a little bit later. But basically, the idea is you can use the AP name, the text inside of that, to match certain conditions for something like a location or maybe a special area of your network or group, AP group maybe, that you want to authorize in a special way or apply a special policy to. And so that can be very, very useful. And I just replicated that on the authentication side as well. And then in the case of the called station ID case, you can choose to make it upper or lower. I'll just make it upper since ICE tends to have everything upper as well. And then the MAC delimiter, you can choose to use hyphens or colons. I don't really care what you use, but it's good to be consistent. I'll go ahead and use colons this time. Let's see if that causes any problems. We'll live dangerously today. And then the username case, you can do it lower, upper, doesn't matter. I think traditionally everything is done lowercase. So we'll leave it at that. And then apply those changes. And we'll go take a look at that here shortly when we do our first authentication to see what that looked like. And then I don't think there's really anything else in here that we need to mess with. None of those things, we didn't need to change anything there. No special attributes we needed to do. So there's that. The next thing I wanted to show you in our configuration is the policies. So we have different policies configured. In the case of guest, it's pretty simple. We're just going through and configuring. I'm choosing to do, software-defined segmentation, some tagging in here. You don't have to do that, not a big deal. Just make sure that you enable the policy. And then I chose all these options so that we have profiling happening. This will let the controller send ICE radius attributes for profiling the endpoints that come in. And then obviously we wanted to specify which VLAN we wanted this the WLAN to be associated with this profile. So we chose guest in the case of guest. And then we don't have anything to worry about for QoS or AVC by default. Same thing with mobility. And inside of advanced, this is where we want to go ahead and we can choose our DHCP server, which I did. We want to make sure that we're using ICE AAA policy. This is probably the most important part. You want to check this box for AAA override. This means when ICE returns radius attributes to the wireless controller, it will override the wireless controller's defaults and use whatever ICE tells it to do for session timeouts, maybe a VLAN change, things like that if necessary, or WLAN SSID, things like that. And then for NAC state, this is just a way of saying we want to use ICE as our AAA server. NAC type obviously is radius. This is the one of the policies that we configured. Accounting list. This is the accounting list policy, and I think that's it for these settings in the advanced tab for guest. So I'm going to switch over now to IoT, and you can see pretty much everything is the same here. All I did is I just updated the default SGT number, still enabled it on the access policy side. Did everything the same. The only difference is that we're using that employee VLAN now for our IoT devices. We don't do anything in these two tabs. And then inside of advanced, we do all the same things. Get an IP address, make sure we're using the ICE AAA group policy parameters we set for authentication, authorization, and accounting. Nothing special there. And then we should be good. What else are we forgetting? I know there's something. Oh, tags. Of course, tags. So this is something new in the latest Catalyst switch wireless controllers with iOS XE. I covered basically the way that they've modeled this in the previous webinar. So if you're not familiar with this, you want to go back and take a look at that. But basically, what happens is they have the ability to use policy tags, site tags, AP tags to determine how your access point, your wireless network, is going to handle WLANs and policies and different things like that. So what I did to keep my mind really, really simple is I only have one site, right, sitting here in my home and my lab network. And so I'm going to just keep it to the default policy tag to keep it simple, not get too crazy. I'm sure the wireless team has lots of videos and documents on best practices for how to do all your tags for a worldwide deployment with hundreds or thousands of access points. So I'm not going to get into that. I just want to be able to show you for ICE, we want to have these different WLANs, and we have the WLAN profiles that we can add. So basically, you click Add, and then you select which of the profiles. We've already selected all of the WLANs, so there's nothing here to see, but I wanted to show you what that looks like. And then we can choose which policy profile it maps to. So we have all those predefined, and the reason we do this is we want to make sure that we push these WLAN profiles with our SSIDs and everything. We want to push those out to any of our APs that have this default policy tag, right? And so once we define that, we can make sure that our AP is configured with that policy tag. Oh, there we go. Took a little while. So here's our access point. And you can see that I've customized our access point name a little bit. By default, it usually shows the MAC address of the AP, but I went ahead and I said, okay, this is AP-SJC for San Jose, 04 as if it's like a building. So, in Cisco, we number our buildings, SJC, 01, 02, 03, 04 on up. Then a floor number, like the second floor, and then D2. This is just a way to say, like, this is, if you imagine a grid on a floor, basically what's the region on that floor where that AP might be sitting, if you go by the columns in the building, different areas or regions. And so whatever your format is for how you do it, that's just the way that I wanted to communicate how we could very quickly and easily communicate like a location inside of using our AP name that we could potentially use in an ICE policy. So that's what that's for. And then if we scroll over, you can see that this AP has the default policy tag applied, the site tag, and the RF tag. And this is these different attributes that we can configure and tag these different APs with. Like I said, I only have one AP, so I kept it really simple for you by doing the default. But the default policy tag, we said we want to be able to have the guest WLAN, the IoT WLAN, and the corporate WLAN all being used by this access point. And so that's what's happening. And if I go look I have an iPad sitting over here as well that I'm going to use as my test client today. And if I go look at that iPad, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my Wi-Fi. And we should see all of those SSIDs broadcasting. Come on. Don't make a liar out of me. There we go. It's thinking about it now. There we go. Okay. Whew. Had me worried there for a little bit. So what we're going to do is, just like last time, we're going to connect to the guest network. And it pops up. It does that redirection to the ICE portal for the acceptable user policy where we can accept it. And we'll get onto our network. So this is where we left off last time, right? I wanted to kind of go through and kind of show you some of the configurations and show you all that. What we're going to do now is I want to be able to go through finally and show you pre-shared keys on the IoT side of things. So we're going to go click on the IoT network. And again, pre-shared key, pretty simple. So I'm going to put in the Cisco 123 pre-shared key and join. There it is, easy enough. Um, and I should be able to, of course, go surf the network, whatever. Everything should be fine. Of course it is. I have a network connection. Everything's good. Yay. Okay. So let's go check out ICE. And by the way, if we wanted to go see our client that's come onto the network, we could go check it out over here. Take a look at our clients from the perspective over here. We have a couple different clients. I don't know who one of those is, but that's okay. Then if we go into ICE, let's refresh our live logs. Okay. Looks like we had some iPads trying to connect already. So what we want to do here is take a look and see we had our guest Wi-Fi that we just logged into. We permitted access on that for the guest Wi-Fi. And let me do a refresher with you as well over here. When we configured our guest Wi-Fi policy previously, what we did is we said anything that's coming in that's a MAB request, right? It wasn't authenticated with 802.1x. We wanted to check for the radius called station ID ending with guest. So remember what I said about the way that the controller can send us information about where the endpoint is connecting into with that AP name. It can also concatenate the SSID name to it, and that's typically what it does, and that's why we have guest here. And you'll notice for the Wi-Fi, the IoT Wi-Fi, we're checking that it ends with IoT, and with corporate, we're checking that it ends with corporate. And that's basically how we can differentiate in ICE our different SSID names that it's coming in on. So we're going to do MAC authentication bypass, and whenever an endpoint comes in, we're checking our internal identity store. And if we've never seen it before, that's okay. Just continue. If it fails, it means ICE has never seen it. If it's not found, continue because it's never seen it. That's fine. And then for our policy, we kept it really, really simple. Basically, when it was an open network, we just said, permit access as the default. But once we locked it down to require an acceptable user policy, we said we're going to require the guest flow. Basically, the guest flow option in ICE is a MAC filter. And until the user clicks the acceptance of the user policy, it's not. It's basically filtering the MAC. It's saying you're not allowed to send traffic on the network. That's the flag that it uses. But once you click that, it says, okay, they've completed the guest flow, whatever that requirement was, because maybe it's an AUP. Maybe we need you to enter your mobile phone number, or username, email, whatever that guest flow is that you have in your ICE portal. That's what the guest flow is. And then once you complete that, then you're able to permit access. And that's what we just did when we joined the guest network. Now, if we go back, we're doing IoT Wi-Fi, right? That's the one we just did with our pre-shared key. So let's see what that looks like. So IoT MAB request again. And again, same thing, internal endpoint. If it's not there, go ahead and just keep going, and we'll see if we make a default match in the authorization rules. So we have quite a few things going on here. And so I want to show you basically how we can match all of these different crazy things with our single IoT WLAN, but we can use different attributes of our endpoints, of the pre-shared keys to be able to permit access and do MAC filtering based on those pre-shared keys and the MAC addresses of those devices. So if I go back and I look at this, our IoT device, we came in and you see that it authenticated using the IoT Wi-Fi default policy, and that's just the basic MAB, so that's what we expect. And then it hit IoT Wi-Fi SJC04 APs. So let's go see what that was. So basically it came down and it hit this rule right here. And the reason why it did that is because I went in and I changed the formatting of our the way that the MAC address gets sent across, right? And so it wasn't able to match with the hyphens, right? Because we said we're going to do it with colons. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to go change this really quick. It's kind of funny how that works. So it didn't match that one. It went all the way through and it matched on the called station ID containing SJC04. So let's take a look at that in our LiveLog details. Okay. So what you can see, if we scroll down here, I want to show you, here it is. Here's that called station ID. So this is the called station ID that we've defined in the wireless controller. We said we want to use the AP name joined with the SSID name. So you can see there's the name, colon, and then .iot is our SSID name. So we're able to use this information to match against our ISE policy to know how to authorize it. And so what we said was, if the calling station ID contains SJC04, then we're going to assign the mPSK IOT authorization profile. We should have not gone all the way to mPSK. We should have started with a single PSK. So what I want to do is go ahead and come up here and I want to modify this one to use colons instead. And I think you guys will see how that works. Oh, I know the problem because I'm using my iPad. That's why. I actually have some Raspberry Pis here. That's why I didn't match that rule, because this is not a Raspberry Pi. It all makes sense now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and plug in my Raspberry Pi. It's going to take about a minute to fire up and perform an authentication, and then we'll see that one. So what we did is my iPad, because it's not a Raspberry Pi, it's not in the signage group, it fell through and it matched this rule on mPSK. So that's what was going on there. See, it all makes sense once you start working through the troubleshooting of the whole thing, right? But since we're here, I'm going to go show you mPSK IoT and show you what that looks like inside of my authorization rules. So that's actually an authorization rule, authorization profile, and mPSK IoT is right here. What we're doing with PSK is we're able to have an endpoint associate to a WLAN based on a pre-shared key, right? That's how it works, just even at your home. And that's what determines if the wireless controller will allow the endpoint on to the WLAN. Is does it know the pre-shared key or not, right? What's happening now, though, is the radius request is coming into ICE with the same information, and ICE is saying, hang on a second, I know you think it's okay for this device to come in, but I have my own policies that I want to apply. And so one of those is the ability to specify the pre-shared key. And so this is where we can say, certain devices based on our policy in ICE are only allowed to use certain pre-shared keys. And so in this case, we were using the Cisco 123 pre-shared key, and that's why it was able to use or get mapped to this authorization profile, and it matched this, and so it was able to come onto the network, and we were able to surf the internet on the IoT WLAN. If we match this policy and my iPad did not have that pre-shared key, it would override the WLAN association and it would knock this device off the network. It wouldn't allow my iPad onto the network. So we're going to show you some of those things here. But I just wanted to show you real quick how our iPad got authorized using a pre-shared key inside of ICE. And this is the mPSK option. Let's go back now and let's do a refresh, and hopefully we should see that Raspberry Pi. There we go. So we have our Raspberry Pi came in, it got profiled. We matched the Wi-Fi IoT policy. And if we look at how it got authorized, it hit Raspberry Pi profile. So let's go back and let's take a look at that. So this one hit Raspberry Pi profile. And basically what we're able to do is it was able to associate with the WLAN, but we're still able to use things like ISE's endpoint profiling policies to be able to match and determine that it's allowed access on the network. And as long as it had a good a good pre-shared key for that WLAN, we permitted access to it, right? So that's really cool that we were able to do that. But the other thing I want to be able to do is show you guys some other options if it matches that pre-shared key. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this one off now, save it. Okay, so now it should fall through, and hopefully this endpoint is in my signage group, and so hopefully we should match the signage policy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the live sessions, and I should see my Raspberry Pi sitting here. If you didn't know about this, you can actually re-authenticate an endpoint right here just by clicking re-authenticate. You can see the change of authorization and radius happened. If I go back and look at my live log, I can do a refresh. And there we go. It came through. It's still matching the Raspberry Pi profile. Not there. It's matching the Raspberry Pi profile, which is, did I not? It's associated. It should have hit the signage group. That's interesting. Let's try that again. Live sessions. Re-authenticate. That is not going through. Let me try this again. I'm going to unplug it and replug it. That'll take about a minute to happen to go through and hopefully re-authenticate. I don't know why that one wasn't going through. So the idea here is, I'm going to go back now to our slides. Hopefully you've been able to see how we were able to do a single pre-shared key with the wireless controller and ICE. That's the main thing. And just like you do at home, right? You can set it to anything you want. And then as long as it matches, you are able to authenticate to the wireless controller. But what's special here is ICE has the ability to do MAC filtering and determine whether or not that device should be allowed onto the network based on the pre-shared key information. And of course, the way that we respond with the attributes in the authorization profile. So there's that. Then the next is mPSK, multi pre-shared keys. So the idea here is you can configure up to 5 different pre-shared keys on a single SSID, and you can do it either in the command line or you can do it with the GUI. And then you have the ability for all your endpoints to basically associate to it using a different pre-shared key. This can be useful if you're trying to rotate your keys, or if you want to have different devices that come in, maybe different groups use different pre-shared keys, different device sets use different pre-shared keys, and you want to be able to control that and override it based on your ICE policy. You can do those kinds of things with ICE. And notice that you can also have these devices that are in that share the same pre-shared key. You can basically have them be in their own little group, or you can actually do some segmentation between them, some peer-to-peer blocking, so that they don't actually interfere with each other, even though they're using the same pre-shared key. So that's an option in the Catalyst controller as well. So let's go do mPSK, and I want to first see how we did on our re-authentication of our Raspberry Pi. So if I refresh this, oh, it is not allowing it on at all right now. I don't know what we did to not allow that. DCA632. It should have been matching the colons. And see, this is what happens whenever I changed when I changed my uh, configuration settings on the was it AAA advanced. I was playing fast and wild. I shouldn't have done it. I said my delimiter is going to be a colon. I'm going to change it back to a hyphen and see if that makes a difference. And apply that. Um, so you can see how you can play with it, and hopefully that'll in the AP name SSID. You guys now saw how that came across in our authentications, and so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to have my signage Raspberry Pi re-authenticate. And while we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to configure the WLAN with multiple pre-shared keys for IoT. So you come over here, we have security, and currently we are doing a single pre-shared key. You can just come right up in here to the mPSK configuration. You can say, I want to add another one. And in this case, I'm going to add a pre-shared key. I'm going to go ahead and do the Cisco 123 again. Let's make sure I typed it right. Yes, I did. We'll apply that. Oh, I got to give it a priority. I'm just going to say priority 0. Apply. And it's duplicating the one I already have down here. I didn't test to see how that works, but I'm going to just make sure I duplicate it here because we're allowed to do 0 through 4 up here. So I'm going to just make sure I have it up there. And another one I'm going to do is ICE is cool. Let's make sure I got that spelled correctly. I do. And that should be good to do multiple PSKs. I could do obviously up to 5. I'll just apply this. And actually, I do have one more that I want to do. I'll show you that one. 2. So this one, I'm just going to go steal it right from my slides. I don't want to take any chances on. Oh, come back here. Pre-shared key there. I want to make sure that I don't fat finger it. So I'll take that and I'll paste it right in here. There it is. Okay, I'm going to apply that. And the reason I'm doing this is because I have another Raspberry Pi that's going to use this as its pre-shared key. So I'm going to update that. And now I'm going to come over here and hopefully my Raspberry Pi has re-authenticated. It looks like it has. And now it's matching a totally different policy. So I don't know. More troubleshooting to do. We don't have time to go through and do this today. So I'm not going to troubleshoot it. But you can see you got to play with the different calling station IDs or usernames for radius. I did some of these as well to see how they would work. Username normalization works for the radius username. So if you normalize it by stripping out the colons or the dashes, that works. And then the same for the calling station ID. The dashes work when I did it by specifying the dashes. It doesn't matter whether you do uppercase or lowercase. It's case insensitive when you want to do a match that way. But for some reason, it's not matching signage. I don't know why it's bypassing that and going down to this one for now. So I'm going to leave this Raspberry Pi behind because now what we want to try and do is hopefully do mPSK. We did match mPSK IoT just now, but hopefully we're going to be able to match this Raspberry Pi one. I'm going to plug that in. And this one has the that SSID, the pre-shared key that we plugged in, that third one. I can't show it to you now. This Raspberry Pi has this pre-shared key configured in it, and so it should associate with that. And when it does, what we're going to do is hopefully match Raspberry Pi mPSK because it's going to be identified in our endpoint group as a Raspberry Pi, and then it's going to hit this mPSK for Raspberry Pi. Let's go take a look at that authorization rule while it's still authenticating. Okay, mPSK for Raspberry Pi. Okay, so what I did is I changed it now. Before we had the PSK value as Cisco 123. In this case, we have this seemingly random string as our PSK value. So it should associate with this, and because it matches this PSK value in the ISE policy, it should work. And if I do a refresh, hopefully, man, they're all coming in on the SJC04. Oh, let me just turn it off. There's the problem. I just need to turn off. This takes precedence because it hits this first. It's a match, right? Um, and let's try it again. Let's go back to our sessions and refresh. This is the right one. Let's re-authenticate. Go back to our live logs. Refresh. Okay, there we go. That's what we were hoping for. Okay, so now our once we disabled that policy, it fell through and it matched our other policy for Raspberry Pi mPSK, and that's what we were hoping for, is that it would hit Raspberry Pi mPSK and come onto the network. And if we go look at our client list now, monitoring for our clients, we should see the A3BB client. That's our Raspberry Pi right there. So he's associated to the network using that pre-shared key because I said that was okay to use. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go back into ICE. We're going to do one more thing. Look at our authorization policies. Is now we're going to, this one just worked. So now I'm going to disable this one, and hopefully we're going to fall through, and this time we're going to hit facilities. And this is a special one because this is iPSK. So let's explain how this works. All right. So we just did mPSK. You guys saw that we had Cisco 123, ICE is cool, and we had this other SSID pre-shared key that we used, all on a single IoT SSID. What we're going to do now is identity, or I like to call individual pre-shared key, because it's typically a unique pre-shared key for each MAC address coming into the network. And the way this works is you assign each of your devices a unique pre-shared key, and it kind of works like a password. And we rely on ICE to figure out if that password matches or not dynamically using custom attributes. And so if you've not seen that before, the idea here is we can map that pre-shared key to an individual MAC address, and we can also use it for groups and profiles. And that's kind of what you were seeing earlier, where I was using ICE profiling policies. And oh, I forgot to show you the endpoint group policy that we matched as well for the signage. So we have the ability to assign our endpoints MAC addresses into different ICE endpoint groups and match those, assuming they use the right pre-shared key. And so that's what we were doing in our policy. And so now what we want to do is do it with an individual pre-shared key per MAC address. And if you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I have a hard enough time managing, a couple of, 3 to 5 pre-shared keys. I can't imagine doing a unique one for every single MAC address coming into my network. And the answer is yes. It can get very complicated. But this is a great way to ensure that if one device gets compromised, you don't affect hundreds or thousands of other IoT devices or something if you have to rotate that password or something. So it's nice to have a individual pre-shared key. To help you with this, we have something that was developed by one of our Cisco TSAs and one of our ICE TMEs called the iPSK Manager. It's an open source project that allows you basically to have a website where you administer a database of these pre-shared keys based on the MAC addresses. You can have these different end users come in. You can imagine different people in different departments around your company or university or something, and it's now their job to go manage these individual pre-shared keys for all of their devices. It's not your job. And so that helps delegate the task and make it a lot easier on you. And the way it works is it goes in and it adds these individual pre-shared keys into ISE's custom attributes table. I want to go show you that now and then show you how that works with this Raspberry Pi. So let's do that. So let's go in and I want to show you how we can do endpoint custom attributes. So what we have is these are we have user custom attributes. You can also do it for internal users in ICE. You can have custom attributes, but we want endpoint custom attributes. If you look down here, you can see I've already defined some, one for department, owner, and iPSK. And we can come in and we can just keep adding new attributes that we care about. Manufacturer, and we can say we want it to be a string. And so these are attributes that we can populate for all of our endpoints inside of ICE. And so now that we've defined our custom attributes table, you can actually go in to something like context visibility and look at your endpoints. And if we find our Raspberry Pi, you can see its attributes. And so it's actually been assigned to a Raspberry Pi group, but we also have custom attributes, and you can see owner, department, there's that manufacturer attribute I just added, or iPSK. So in this case, the owner's Bob Smith, maybe that's his email address. He belongs to, it belongs in the facilities department, so maybe they're using this Raspberry Pi to measure something in the facilities, in some room, monitor something, right? And then here's that iPSK value. So before we had the iPSK, we were putting in an authorization rule, but now we can actually customize it per endpoint using this attribute. So let's go see what that looks like in the ICE policy. So what's going to happen is we're going to re-authenticate this device. So let's go do that right now. And it should match facilities because you just saw that our endpoint had a custom attribute named department that was facilities. And if that happens, then we can actually do an individual pre-shared key check based on that endpoint attribute. So first, let's go re-authenticate our endpoint. Let's do that right. There it is. Re-authenticate. And go back to our LiveLogs. Let's refresh. Okay, there it is. So we re-authenticated and it matched the facilities policy and it applied the authorization rule for iPSK endpoint attribute. So Thomas, what is iPSK endpoint attribute? Well, let's go take a look. Actually, let's go over here and do it. So we're going to go to Policy, Results, Authorization Profiles, and look at iPSK endpoint attribute. So we're still doing PSK mode, but look at what we did here differently. Before we had PSK equals the pre-shared key. Now we're actually specifying that we want to use information from the endpoints table. And you can see we could have used department, we could use iPSK, we could have used the owner's name, right? We can use these values in that table to match what the PSK should be. And so that's how we're now able to use this table value custom for this MAC address coming into our network. And so it matches up, and if it matches, it works, and it's able to come onto the network. So that's really, really cool. So that's how we were able to do that, and that's how you get an iPSK configured in ICE for a single user device. Now, anybody that wants to do this, again, at scale, you probably need to manage these with something like iPSK Manager or using ISE APIs, going into the context visibility and manually editing the attributes, probably not going to be very fun. So just keep that in mind if this is something you want to do at scale. You could also do it by doing CSV imports of your endpoints as well. That would be another option because custom attributes are supported in the endpoint import export files. So real quick, I know we're getting at time here, so I want to make sure we keep moving and we do 802.1x. So those of you that aren't familiar with 802.1x, here's a quick review. So we have an endpoint that wants to connect, and we want to make sure that we authenticate it. And so to do that, we want to securely pass our credentials through a secure tunnel, an extensible authentication protocol tunnel. You've heard lots of those with EAP, PEEP, TEEP, PEEP, MS Chat v2, all these kinds of things, right? So we're going to take those credentials from that user, and it could be username, password, could be a certificate, could be a token, any number of things. And we're going to send that across to ISE via the network device. Once it hits the network device, it's going to take the credentials from the 802.1x frame, because again, we don't have an IP address yet, so it's just layer two frames. We're going to repackage that into Radius with some of those attributes so that ISE knows what to do with it from the wireless controller's perspective. And ISE is going to take that information and it's going to go check the identity against an identity store. It could be Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, LDAP, any number of things. And assuming there's a match in there that the user exists and the password matches or the certificate is a match, then we can run that against one of our ISE policies. Assuming it's accepted, we apply the appropriate authorization profile attributes. We send those back to the network device, and it's able then to assign the appropriate segmentation, access control list, VLAN, all that good stuff for that session, and communicate a success back to the user to say, congratulations, come get your IP address, join our network, and surf the net, right? So that's what's able to happen there. And of course, if it doesn't match, if something's wrong, then it's not authorized. If you're doing a certificate, we have something in ISE called the Certificate Authentication Profile. The idea is you typically match one of these things to make sure that it's authentic. You check the signer of the certificate to make sure that you trust whoever signed the certificate, and then as long as the information in there matches, you can use these fields, these text fields, much like we did with the access point name. We're able to match these against organizations or usernames or departments, any kind of thing like that, emails that we want to authorize a user or device based on these certificates. The other thing we need to talk about is configuration of the supplicant with certificates. It's really easy to do username, password. You guys have done that for forever, right? But you may or may not have used certificates. That gets a little trickier because you need to provision or push those certificates to all of your endpoints. And we have different ways that we can do this depending upon the network operating or the operating system of the endpoint. And for that reason, we also have the ability for ISE to do bring your own device registrations and provision certificates to endpoints. And we also have many mobile device management or enterprise mobility management partners that ISE supports. We have like 12 or 13 different partners. I can't remember the final number, but basically all the major MDM vendors ISE supports. So we can work with them to have them provision a certificate to your endpoints, and then ISE can authenticate it when those devices come into the network. We're going to use Meraki SM today. I'll show you how that works real quick. And so with that, I want to go ahead and do an authentication. So let's take a look at our ISE policies for how this is going to work. So we've been looking at the IoT Wi-Fi, and we're now going to look at employees. So if we could do 802.1x with either wired or wireless, if it's wireless 802.1x, we just want to also make sure that the SSID ends in corp for corporate. It's our corporate network. And we don't want to do MAB now. We want to make sure we're using one of these good, strong 802.1x extensible authentication protocols for securely sending the credentials across. And when we do that, we have lots of different authentication policies that we can match. We could match it against an Active Directory server, like we have here in dCloud in my demo environment. We could match against our internal ISE database for internal users. We could match against a certificate that's using an ETLS sent over ETLS. We can check that certificate profile that I just showed you. We could also check against Azure Active Directory. This is something we've done since ISE 3.0. We can check against my TrustZero Azure Active Directory domain to see if that user exists out there. And if it's not in any of these databases, we probably want to deny access because it's not one of our users. But if there is a match, we can go ahead and check for these different group memberships for these different identity stores and these different users coming in. So what I want to do is let's go ahead and let's bring up that iPad again. And I want to associate to my corporate network. So let's bring up that iPad. All right. So before I was on guest and then I was on IoT. Now I'm going to go on to the corporate network. And so if I click corporate, all right, so it magically joined. It didn't prompt me for any kind of credentials. That's interesting, right? The reason for that is because if I go into general and then I look at VPN and device management, you will see that I have provisioned this device with a certificate from Meraki System Manager, my MDM. And so I actually was able to provision a certificate right here for Thomas at TrustZero.onMicrosoft.com. That's my Azure Active Directory domain name. So I was able to provision that. And if I go look at ISE now, and I look at the LiveLog, and I refresh it, you can see I was able to authenticate my iPad with Thomas at TrustZero, and it matched my policy for employee certificates. And we were able to authenticate me with that certificate. So whenever you provision a device with a certificate, it looks something like this. So inside of Meraki, I have my lab network and I have Meraki Systems Manager, and you have some different settings that you can configure. And so if I go inside of here, I have multiple profiles that I can potentially push out. And so if I search on corp, I have different profiles that I can push out, and I can determine which devices I want to push. And so any of my devices that have been tagged with Thomas, I can push this corp TLS Thomas profile to. And this is basically how all of the MDMs work. You can specify different kinds of settings. And so we can do Wi-Fi settings. So I can say, I want you to be able to associate to Corp or Corp2 or, IceNet or whatever the Wi-Fi SSID is. And that's what I've done here with .corp. I've said the SSID I want you to associate to is .corp. And when you do that, I want you to use TLS for authentication. And I want you to use this identity certificate for authentication. And you have ways of provisioning this at scale if you have, hundreds or thousands of devices. But then I was also able to go ahead and provision a certificate to this device as well. And you have ways of actually provisioning, SCEP certificates and things to each device, each user uniquely as well, using these MDMs. And so that's how I was able to provision it with Meraki SM and do an authentication that way. So I wanted to show you that real quick. You've probably all done 802.1x with username password, but maybe you haven't done with certificate. So I wanted to be able to show you something like that. And with that, I think we're pretty much at time. I just want to go back and remind you, for anybody that's a partner or an employee watching, we have everything I've done today was done in dCloud. And so we have the ability to connect either Cisco Catalyst access points into our dCloud pods or Meraki. We can do wired wireless devices. So if you want to be able to do something like that, this is how I've done all these demos today. And I know a lot of you are always looking for lots of great ICE information, which we love. That's why we do this webinar series. I just want to remind you, I get a lot of requests in the comments that Rigo is going to have you fill out in the survey. We love your comments. I always read them. But a lot of people end up requesting stuff that we've already done. So I just want to remind you to go take a look at our YouTube channel or the ICE webinars archive. We have a lot of these webinars are already recorded out there, and they probably cover some of the topics you're looking for. We try to put the resources and different aspects of the talk in the show notes so you can jump right to the topic you're interested in. So be aware of that if you want to go learn some more things. So here we have lots of resources for you. And some of the other things that I've talked about in this webinar and the previous one on the Catalyst, we've got some other documents that may be of interest to help you configure some of these things that you've seen today. If I went a little too fast for you in my review of the configs. So with that, I know Rigo, we're probably out of time. I just want to check and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Thomas. I actually just reviewed our panel here, and I don't see any outstanding questions. So I think we could go ahead and wrap. What? Actually, I spoke too soon. One
Okay.
just literally came in.
All
So I
right.
think we'll have time for just this one question.
Sure.
When the iPSK manager could be a part of ICE?
Um, it's been talked about, but it hasn't been fully prioritized yet. But yes, that has come up. It's just a matter of being prioritized. So if that's something that you're interested in, I encourage you to send us feedback. There's a Make-A-Wish feature in ICE. Go ahead and fill out the form, send it to our product managers, let them know that it's something that you are excited to see and have it integrated into ICE. I think it's a great thing that you can ask for.